So Jesus asked, why are you so afraid? And we understand. Sometimes we're afraid because circumstances surprise us with legitimate danger, and in those cases we need to respond in faith rather than just react in panic. Sometimes from our perspective, it seems as though God doesn't care, that He's not moving. When that happens, we just have to tell ourselves He is. We know this. He is good, faithful, and present. And sometimes, like the disciples, we kind of forget who Jesus is. We have to remind ourselves that because He's present in our lives, we are covered, we are protected. It will be all right. Even if it's not all right, He will be with us because He is God incarnate. And sometimes our faith wavers. We have to remember that He does care when that happens. And then there are some that just don't know Him, haven't received Him as Savior, haven't developed that relationship with Him, are not really pursuing that relationship with Him. I cannot encourage you strongly enough to get to know Him. We started out with the question He asked in the crowd that day when a woman who had been ill for 12 years received her healing, and He asked, who touched me? And then last Sunday, He asked the man at the side of the pool of Bethesda, do you want to get well? Of course, we ask ourselves that question. This morning we consider His question that He asked of His disciples, why are you so afraid? And on the subject of fear, I'm reminded of an article I saw not too long ago when Steve Allen was still on television. He was interviewing a psychologist one evening on his show. And the psychologist stated that the only two instinctive fears in humanity are the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. And of course, Steve Allen, being the comedian, immediately replied, I have a great fear of making a loud noise while falling. And then Jerry Seinfeld, a little more contemporary of those, of the comic line, said once, according to recent studies, the number one fear among those who responded to the study was public speaking. That's the thing that scares people the most. Number two was death. To which Seinfeld responded, does that sound right? Death is number two. That means to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you're better off in the casket than doing the eulogy. So we're going to turn this morning to the book of Mark, and I hope you'll exercise the privilege and open your New Testaments with me. If you didn't bring your Bible with you, there's one provided there in the hymnal rack in front of you. And if you need a little help finding the text, the page number is printed there for that particular copy of the Scriptures as well. We're going to turn to Mark chapter 4 and begin reading with verse 35. Mark chapter 4, beginning with verse 35. That day, it says, when evening came, Jesus said to His disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took Him along, just as He was in the boat. There were also other boats with Him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke Him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And so we can ask ourselves the question that Jesus asked, why am I so afraid? Why are we so afraid? Why does fear stalk us and sometimes overcome us? And we can take this passage of Scripture apart and get to some of the root causes of our fear. We see that the squall comes up and the waves broke over the boat. This kind of thing happens a lot on the Sea of Galilee. Geographically, it's located in between a couple of mountain ranges, and sometimes the storm can come over one of those mountains, and you don't even see it coming. There's no advance warning. And because it was a fishing region in Jesus' day, there were often fishing boats out on this huge, in the Scriptures it's referred to as the lake, and they're there, and then the storm came up, and they didn't see it coming. It caught them off guard, and they were far from the land. And the waves were splashing over the side of the boat, as Mark writes, so that it was nearly swamped. There was reason to be afraid. This was a legitimate, scary situation. Now, we all have those in our lives. There are some things in life that you're supposed to be scared of. And sometimes they catch us off guard, and we react to them in such a way. We do this when danger surprises us. All of a sudden it's there. And of course we react, because we are created with that fight or flight tendency. We're made that way. It's designed to protect us from danger. You touch something hot, you pull back from it. You sense a threat, you move away from it. You either stand and fight or you flee. However, we are people of faith, and that must temper all of us. That must shape all of who we are. And so we need to learn to respond rather than react. If you go through life just reacting to everything that comes, that's all you'll ever do. Your entire life will be a series of surprises, running in panic and in fear, and all of those things that catch us off guard. Reaction is in fact more of a panic response, just immediately. But response is more thought out. In fact, it's more of a faith response. That's how David could write in the 56th Psalm, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." Now, rest assured, because the fear in this situation, and in many of the situations in our lives, is in fact, the danger is real, then fear is going to come. Remember that. And when circumstances surprise us with legitimate danger, you and I must respond in faith rather than react in fear. Secondly, in verse 38, we are afraid because it seems like God is doing nothing. Do you struggle when God doesn't operate according to your time frame? I do. And don't you wish He would just answer our prayers like this? "All right, I heard your prayer, now go do." Doesn't work that way. Jesus was in the stern, it says in verse 38. He was asleep. As this storm came up and the boat's thrashing about and the water is pouring in, Jesus is asleep. Now understand this. This is not indifference. This is not Jesus not caring. This is Jesus understanding who He is, and that's a completely different sermon. What does He have to be afraid of? He created this sea. That boat's not sinking with Jesus in it. But sometimes it seems like God doesn't care. And when the disciples shouted, "Don't you care if we drown?" Who of us has not at times wondered, "God, do you even care? Are you doing anything at all? I can't see evidence of you. I don't feel you. I'm going through a dry season. It seems like everything is stacking up against me." And from our perspective, it can seem like God is doing absolutely nothing. That's because you and I are not omniscient. We don't know everything. We don't see everything. In cases like that, it helps us to remember Peter's words. 2 Peter 3:9. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. And then perhaps Jeremiah's words in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, would be useful. Jeremiah wrote, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I will say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. When you and I are afraid, we must not fall into the trap of thinking God does not care. And that he is not working or doing something. That's one of the devil's best lies. God doesn't care about you. He put all this into motion and he turned his back on it. And we're just whirling through the cosmos. He's not aware of what your situation is. He's not paying attention. He's gone. Don't buy that. When we're afraid, we must not fall into that trap. And then third, I find it fascinating the way Jesus responded in verse 39. We are afraid because we forget who Jesus is. Now, how is that possible? Well, when you and I go through life and we are not taking the great truth that Jesus Christ is God incarnate and living our lives based on that, we don't fully apply that truth to our lives. And in effect, we forget who Jesus is. And I can almost see him there in verse 39 as he wakes from a nap and maybe does like you and I do when we wake from a nap. There's a stretch and maybe a yawn, and he's still calm. You will never see an example of Jesus panicking, never. And so, in the midst of all this, he maybe yawned, stretched, and he shut the storm down with a single word. Be quiet. Now, I don't know if he shouted it. I don't know if he just whispered it. Doesn't really matter. I can't stop a storm like that, can you? And when you think about it, if the disciples had just considered who was in the boat with them, they were never in their lives more safe than they were in that fishing boat in the middle of that storm. Now take that and bring it into our own lives. If I will remember who Jesus Christ is and who I am to him, there will be times when the storms come and my boat is rocked and shaken and nearly turned upside down, but because I know who he is and I know who I am to him, I will remember I'm never safer than when Jesus is right there with me, and he's always with me. I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to panic. I don't have to run off in fear and let fear dictate. So who is this Jesus? Well, he's God incarnate. In the book of John, we read in the very first chapter, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's describing Christ. Jesus did not come into existence as a baby in Bethlehem. And that's an important truth. The baby in Bethlehem is a wonderful image, but Jesus Christ has always existed as part of the Trinity. And we must remember, he is God. And that transcends everything. And he is our Savior. Romans 5:8 says that while you and I were still sinners, Christ died for us. And in the midst of all that, he is our friend. John 15:15, Jesus said, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything I learned from my Father I have made known to you. In the age of Facebook, we've learned the difference between friends and acquaintances, haven't we? I mean, some of us have, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that we're connected with through that technology. And in Facebook terms, they're friends. But have you ever looked at your friend list and gone, I don't even know who that person is. How did they get on my list? And in life, there are friends and there are acquaintances. And acquaintances are fine. You see them. Maybe you spend time with them at one social gathering or another. You run across them. But friends, if you go through your entire life and you have just a handful of friends, most of us have only single digits when it comes to friends. Those are the ones at the core of our relationships. If you have those, you're blessed. And Jesus Christ himself has called us friend. What an amazing thing that is. And so when I'm afraid, I remember who Jesus is, and I remember who I am to him. He's going to take care of me. And then fourth, sometimes we're afraid when our faith wavers. And it's in verse 40 that Jesus actually asks the question, why are you so afraid? And on first reading, it sounds like Jesus is telling the apostles to be fearless, to have bravado, to charge in. Don't be afraid of anything. There's no one in this room. In fact, I contend no one in the world that is not afraid of something. Everyone is afraid of something. And in order to understand what Jesus was saying, yes, he was chastising his disciples. Gently, but chastising them. He used what we translate as afraid. When Jesus spoke, it was the Greek word delos. And it means cowardly, fearful, afraid. And so we could just as easily read Jesus' statement as, why are you so cowardly? And if you know anything about courage, you know that courage is not necessarily the absence of fear. It's being afraid and still taking appropriate action. You don't need courage if you're not afraid. Why would you need courage? But when you are afraid, in order to move through life in the midst of fear and uncertainty, that requires courage. And I submit that the best source of courage is your faith. And so this is not so much a matter of being fearless as it is one of having faith. In fact, that's what Jesus said in the second part of his statement. Do you still have no faith? Remember, these are the guys that had been with Jesus throughout his earthly ministry. They had seen the miracle. They had heard the teachings right from his mouth. He, in fact, had taught them directly. They got to sit in a nice little circle, perhaps in a room or around the evening fire or wherever, and listen to Jesus teach directly. If anyone should have had faith, it should have been those guys. But faith is difficult at times. And yet, we must have faith because we remember that Jesus is present and faithful, even when I don't feel it. See, a lot of people want to equate faith with emotion. And there is certainly an emotional component to our faith. What do you do when you don't feel it? What do you do if you're sitting here in this sanctuary right now and we've just worshipped and sung God's praises, granted imperfectly, and we've fellowshiped with one another and it's been good, but what do you do if you're still just not feeling it and you can't wait for the preacher to shut up so we can go home? What do you do then? What if you're not feeling your faith today? Don't let it waver. Remind yourself. Do what David did. Talk to yourself. We kind of laugh with one another about, talking to ourselves and that kind of thing. You're generally not supposed to do that. But David did. Many times he'd say, why are you so downcast? Oh, my soul. Isn't God faithful? Isn't God good? When you're not feeling it, tell yourself Jesus is present and he is faithful. He promised it. In Matthew 28, he said, I am with you always to the very end of this age. So remember, faith, as it says in Hebrews, is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. You're going to be afraid. And Jesus was not saying, don't have fear. He was saying, have more faith than fear. And then finally, we become afraid when we do not know Jesus. And I know, sitting there in that boat, He's with his disciples. Who knew Jesus any better? And yet, it says in verse 41, they were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Who is this? Well, they were still learning who Jesus is. More importantly, they were still developing in their relationship with him. They were still working that out, even though they had been with him for a good while now. Knowing about Jesus is one thing. In the minds of some, he is a historical figure. No one denies the existence of Jesus Christ. But simply knowing he exists is not enough. You and I need to know him. We need to have that relationship with him individually and personally and intimately. And when we do not know Jesus, fear gets the best of us. The disciples were terrified. They've got God in the flesh sitting in their fishing boat. And they're terrified. And before you're too hard on them, let's consider that word, terrified. In the Greek language, it's the word phobio. Does that sound like anything familiar? Phobia? That's where the word comes from. And I submit we've all got them. Everybody in this room's got a phobia or two. The Greek word phobio means to be terrified, to be put to flight. These are the fears that can cripple us. They debilitate us. They stop us cold in our tracks. And you're familiar with some of them. Acrophobia is the fear of high places. And agoraphobia is the fear of big open places. And claustrophobia is the fear of close places. And arachnophobia is the fear of spiders. And some of you are going, yeah, all those make perfect sense to me. And then there are a few that make some sense to me. For example, pyrophobia is the fear of fire. And toxophobia is the fear of poison. And ballistophobia is the fear of getting shot. Well, I'm afraid of that one, aren't you? And then there are some that become even more interesting. Phronomophobia is the fear of thinking. And I've met some people that have that one. And then phobophobia is the fear of fear. And then there are some that just give up altogether, and panophobia is just the fear of everything. And then this one, when we look around, and this may be an issue here, Jen, we may have to address it. Ecclesiophobia is the fear of church. And I make light of those, but you know, if you have a phobia or two, I deal with. I don't like the heights thing. I'm not crazy about the water. So if you have them, we all do. The point here is, though, fear, if we let it run, can debilitate us if we don't know Jesus. It will cripple us if we don't have a relationship with him. And so the disciples said, who is this? They witnessed his power as he stood there in the boat and said, quiet, and the storm stopped. Now I recognize the fact that you may be going through a storm in your own life right now, dealing with your own stuff. And it may be so personal and so deep, you can't even express it and gather the support of the church around you. And I understand that. And maybe Jesus hasn't calmed your storm. Maybe he's going to calm you. And the storm may still exist. One or the other. He is faithful. But if we do not recognize that and we do not have that relationship with him, it will cripple us. So Jesus asked, why are you so afraid? And we understand. Sometimes we're afraid because circumstances surprise us with legitimate danger. And in those cases, we need to respond in faith rather than just react in panic. Sometimes from our perspective, it seems as though God doesn't care, that he's not moving. When that happens, we just have to tell ourselves he is. We know this. He is good, faithful, and present. And sometimes, like the disciples, we kind of forget who Jesus is. We have to remind ourselves that because he's present in our lives, we are covered, we are protected. It will be all right. Even if it's not all right, He will be with us because He is God incarnate. And sometimes our faith wavers. We have to remember that He does care when that happens. And then there are some that just don't know Him. Haven't received Him as Savior, haven't developed that relationship with Him, are not really pursuing that relationship with Him. I cannot encourage you strongly enough to get to know Him. The words from Isaiah 41 are applicable. God told Isaiah and the nation of Israel, and indirectly told us, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you